You're listening to Now I've Heard Everything, interviews from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s with voices from the past.
These kids don't come into this world with all of the baggage we did. They are colorblind and they are gender blind. They also have a chance to be the peacemakers.
Washington insider turned accidental foster mom, Liz Carpenter. Today on Now I've Heard Everything, I'm Bill Thompson. Imagine this scenario. You've had a long and fruitful career as a war correspondent, an aide to a president, a press secretary to a first lady, and a leader of several important social movements. Now you're all set to retire. Life is going to be good. Then you are faced with the prospect of once again becoming a parent at age 73. Now, this all happened to Liz Carpenter, who was a figure during the Lyndon Johnson administration back in the 1960s. When her brother died in 1993, his 3 unruly teenagers came to live with Liz Carpenter, who was at that time 73. In her 1994 book, Unplanned Parenthood, Liz Carpenter describes the unique challenges that she faced, as you can imagine. But she also had some very wise and insightful things to say about those GenX people she was raising and their peers. So here now, from 1994, Liz Carpenter.
I was working on a book about friendship, and I began telling my agent a little bit about what it was like to be the oldest person at the PTA and spend most of my time in the grocery store, more time than the manager. And I told her about how I'd become an Ed McMahon addict to try to make money by pasting those little gold seals on all the magazines you were going to take. And she was amused, and she said, "That's your book, Liz." So I put aside friendship and started writing the book about these children who were living in my house and very much a part of my life. My brother, 79, had died, and there was nobody else who really could take care of them. And it's been a real experience. The part of it that helped me the most, I think, was beginning to see it as a running story and me back as a reporter so I could have a little detachment from the emotional side of it and think of it as the teenagers in the 90s. It's a funny book. You know, if you liked Annie Mame, I think you'll like this book. If you like Cheaper by the Dozen. If you've ever raised teenagers, you'll really identify.
I have a 12 and a 14-year-old right now, and I'm wondering how you did this.
Well, you'll survive. But 13 is the evil age, I think. It's the one that brings on all of the testing of you. And if you can get through that, you can get through anything.
Well, you know, I did wonder. I mean, there's not that big a gap between my wife and myself and our kids' age, but there's quite a gulf between your age and your nieces and nephews' ages.
You said it, and they remind me of it. I'm a white-haired old lady who replaced a white-haired father, but you're probably the baby boomer generation. Mm-hmm. Do you try to be pals with your teenagers?
Well, we like the same music. Let's put it that way.
Well, that's a big difference. I'm strictly Tommy Dorsey, violins, and suddenly all of this blaring metallic stuff on the radio as I drove them to school. And they knew how to get to me, though. They'd say, "Oh, that is a woman pleading for freedom and liberation," or "that is an appeal for out of the squalor of a foreign country." And when it got to have a meaning, which Tommy insisted it did, it became more palatable, and I began listening more. I never got sold on it. I moved all the equipment out to the house where the kids have a lot of music equipment, and it's out of my ear, my one ear. And I was glad for a hearing impairment when Smashing Pumpkins came on.
Sometimes when I put a Beatles record on, my kids say, "Oh, Dad, that's so 60s.
But doesn't it sound great and
Yes.
soothing? I never knew I liked the Beatles or Elvis Presley so much until after I had to hear the next step.
But it's not just the music either, as you said a moment ago. You're a taxi service 24 hours a day.
Well, I've grown out of that now because everybody but Mary drives, and she's into driving lessons. And that was a great freedom because when Tommy started driving and could drive her to school, then I had a few more hours every day. And he had to sign a commitment that he would go get the groceries once a week and certain things that were in order to use the car.
I also know that my wife has boxes of things, collectibles, that she's not going to set out until the kids are long gone, because even teenagers can sometimes be rambunctious and can break things. You must have had a great many things around the house that you had arranged just the way you wanted.
Well, you're so right, because it was my happy hour house, and it was the house I'd gone home from Washington with all the artifacts of my life. And Tommy, who is 6'1" now, couldn't walk through the house without knocking down 2 or 3 things. And you have to learn, though, that furniture can be repaired, that spots can be cleaned up, and just kind of take a sigh and say, I'm stuck with the Bay of Pigs for a few years.
Yes, I'm glad to hear that our house is not the only one that resembles the ground zero of an atomic blast.
Isn't it strange?
Where does it come from? Where does all this clutter come from?
I don't know. Of course, they have a lot of things. They have lots of CD records that never go back in the jackets, and they have jeans are best hung on the floor. My favorite saying was, there are no hooks on the floor. I don't see a hook on the floor, but that's where the mutilated jeans and the scrubbier the better, and the T-shirts would go.
Heaven forbid you should try to patch those jeans.
That's right. No, you've got to have a lot of strands for your status symbol.
Now, something else. I mean, our kids, the polls show anyway, the kids scarcely even know who the current president of the United States is. Do they have any sense of your place in history?
Well, I brought them to Washington on a trip, sort of like the Bobbsey twins go to Washington. Picked up my grandson, who's a teenager, and I really wanted to show him a town that I knew well for 34 years. And they were going through the Smithsonian, and suddenly Tommy says, "We know this one." And I was in a picture with Betty Ford and Rosalind Carter on the ERA. But they know this president because I pulled in all my credits. I've been a friend of President and Mrs. Clinton, and they called and said, "Bring the kids over. You come for dinner," and they'll have dinner on the in the solarium floor with Chelsea. And they had pizza on White House china. They'll never forget that. They're big supporters of them, and they got to meet the president. And I had given them a real warning, look interested, look into his eyes, say something worthwhile. And so I spotted them when they were brought down from the solarium at the White House on that fabulous night, which incidentally I have it in the book, that chapter, Bill and Hillary's Excellent Adventure. And they looked like they were saying the right thing. The president was smiling, and then they moved on to Vice President Gore and Tipper. And so ever after that, it hasn't been the president and Mrs. Clinton. It's been Bill and Hillary and Al and Tipper. Is it too much of a leap for them to try to understand the Johnson administration, to understand the 60s, to understand that time that you were a part of? I think it's a big leap, but I have really tried to tell them about it, the war on poverty, the Head Start projects. And conversation is almost a lost art in this country. And so I've worked hard at seeing that we have an evening meal where everybody brings something to the table to talk about, because otherwise these kids, when they first got to my house, would, if they got to the table at all, they'd prefer to sit in a comfortable chair and eat everything. But if they got the table at all, it was with a Stephen King novel they'd read, or listening into their CDs. I just said that doesn't play, and so we have a blessing, since I may be their only spiritual advisor, and they have begun talking more and more and gotten more and more interested. They're particularly interested in literature, like the boys, Tommy and his friends are big Jack Kerouac readers, the Beat Generation. But also they do quiz me, and particularly since they found out that I was there on the day of the assassination in Dallas. That's a moment in history that I think every school child has some knowledge of. I hope so. And then, what it was like to come back to Washington before that very dark curtain and try to get the country moving again.
Wow. How has the contents of your refrigerator changed?
Well, it's empty a lot of the time, and they stand in front of it. They could get frostbite standing in front of it because they have to make a decision, and it takes a long time to make a decision as they stand there with the door open. And so there's a lot more fast foods. I started out, with the theory that I had to cook a roast and 2 vegetables and 1 salad and hot bread. I can't do it anymore. And they're just as happy with, call in Chinese food. Those are the big nights. And then pizzas. And we try to get some of those sausage biscuits that are made down in Texas. And when the first nip comes, we're into chili and fajitas.
This would not have been the kind of book you wanted to write, though, if you couldn't have been candid enough to disclose that they became an irritation after a while.
Well, you do get sorry for yourself, and without a husband or a shoulder to cry on, and with a lot of anxiety of, am I doing right by them? This is the last years of my life. I don't cover up that you could feel oppressed, and every once in a while I'd have to say to myself when I felt they were particularly not grateful, how many times did I thank my mother? Not enough. We were all there one time, being the same kind of insolent kids, although I think more was required of us. And I think these children have had to learn manners, late in their, I'd say late in their life, but they're, of course, teenagers. But they really had come from a very unstructured, semi-bohemian background, full of words, full of love. There was no problem there. But just, they didn't have to be reliable. They didn't have to get to school on time. I'm a stickler for being everywhere early. In fact, that's because I grew up in a small town of Slato, Texas, and if you missed the Greyhound bus, you were stuck for another week. But the first day I took them to school, I was so worried that we wouldn't get there on time that we were there 30 minutes early and the doors weren't even open. And they really had the last laugh on me.
Have you learned to program your VCR?
No, because I've got these handy little hands and fingers that do that. That's one of the great advantages. They can open the Tylenol bottle and they can get to the VCR and set it for me. Why is it that my generation is really high-tech blind, and these kids, from the time they're little kids, they could just run over there and get everything going on this machine. But this is a spectator generation, and mine was more of a listening generation, I guess, if you grew up with Amos and Andy.
That's right. Well, I sat down the other night to try to teach my 14-year-old daughter a few things about WordPerfect on the computer.
Yes.
And she'd had only just a slight introduction to it at school, but a long enough introduction apparently to be able to show me 3 or 4 keystroke combinations I'd never even seen before. She said, oh, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this. And I started taking a lesson from her.
See how valuable teenagers are. They're proving their worth by being able to get to the machines.
I sense, though, that this experience has, in a way, reinforced your confidence, your optimism.
Well, it has, because I do, after you've known them a while and put up with the flaws, seen the virtues, and the fact that these kids don't come into this world with all of the baggage we did. They are colorblind and they are gender blind. They're have many more friends of the different sexes that are friends, and you don't see everybody as a romantic potential. I think that they also have a chance to be the peacemakers, because most of them are from divorced homes, and I hear them on the phone, have had to talk to one parent on one side of town and then protect that parent from somebody else's anger and not betray one parent to another. And, just maybe out of this, and their desire to avoid contention, we will have people who really are into the business of peace negotiation.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Well, if you were free, I'd say marry me, because I need somebody who's good with a toolbox, but I might prefer your teenager.
Liz Carpenter died in 2010. She was 89. Now, you can get a copy of Unplanned Parenthood by Liz Carpenter by tapping the link in our show notes or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. And heardeverything.com is where you'll also find my 1989 interview with somebody else who knows something about raising children, Dr. Benjamin Spock.
It wasn't until I was in my 60s that I realized that the major problems and the major needs of children are ones that will have to be satisfied through political action.
And my 2000 interview with the great Betty Friedan.
I didn't set out to make a revolution at all, but I certainly didn't realize I was going to start the most massive revolution of them all.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you listen to podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, as war once again rages in the Middle East, we're going to go back to 1989 and the interview that I did back then with the former general and then, at that point, future Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon.
The only thing that we ask is to be able to live normal life in our one small, tiny country.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.